It's nice seeing everybody get along out there.
It is.
You gotta laugh.
This is true.
You know what?
All right, I'll call this meeting back to order.
So there's a motion.
Yes, Mayor Walker, I would like to make a motion to suspend the rules of the meeting tonight so that we can make an agenda change. So I need a second, and
I second that.
we need to vote on it.
Yes, certainly.
Please vote.
Can you hit the button?
All right. That carries.
And Mayor Walker, I move that we adjust the agenda so that item number 8, which is a report on Bennett's Village Playground, now moves to be just above the public hearing on the proposed real estate tax rate. So that will become agenda item number 2.
And we'll have 10 minutes allocated for
Total, yes.
for this item. All right.
Thank you.
All right, so Mr. Daly, what is that?
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. Thank you for the adjustment to the agenda and moving this up this evening. The item before you tonight is a proposal from Bennett's Village, a local nonprofit organization who is proposing a partnership with the city to fund, design, and construct an all-abilities playground at Penn Park. Such a facility is certainly in need in the Central Virginia region, with the closest facilities of this type currently located in the Richmond and Northern Virginia areas. A playground designed for individuals across the age and ability spectrum is a bit of a departure from traditional playground design, which have clearly focused on children and more primarily on able-bodied children. While the city has incorporated accessible play elements in our playgrounds throughout the park system and at the city schools, the construction of a dedicated all-abilities play facility is a unique opportunity for the community. Joining us tonight are Kara McClurkin and Brian Gibney, representing Bennett's Village, who have a brief presentation to share with you outlining the proposed partnership. Following the presentation, we'll be pleased to engage in any discussion and answer any questions you may have.
Thanks for moving us up. We have some middle school students who need to get to bed. So before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our son, Bennett. When Bennett was 1, he was born with spinal muscular atrophy, and folks with SMA are missing a gene that allows their muscles to regulate and to work properly. So Bennett couldn't sit up on his own, he couldn't walk, and over time, without treatment, muscles deteriorate and they lose the ability to move and to eat and to breathe. And so, as you might expect, with this diagnosis, we were devastated. We were told to take him home and love him, and that 2 years was the typical lifespan. Well, in spite of the diagnosis, Bennett survived past the age of 2, and he did more than just survive, he thrived. He was an amazingly curious and social and funny guy. He loved playing with his friends, he loved playing with his sister, and the power wheelchair gave him independence that he did not have without it. Otherwise, we basically had to carry him around everywhere. Most importantly, Bennett loved to play. Play is important for a lot of reasons. To children's development, but for the rest of us too. It helps us learn to problem solve and test boundaries, to meet challenges, to work out differences and build relationships, sometimes with people you've never met before. Play is not only important for children, but it's important for the entire community. But most of our playgrounds actually have some pretty significant obstacles, particularly for those who have mobility challenges. If you look at the surfaces, they often are mulch-based, which makes it really hard to get in. It doesn't do you any good to have a handicapped accessible space if once you get into the equipment, there's no way to access it. Swings, while there are swings on most of our playgrounds that do have some adaptations, they were way too big for Bennett. You can see in this bucket swing, I sort of shoved my sweatshirt in there. He couldn't hold the rings, so he wasn't able to swing. And there's many kids with many different kinds of disabilities that make it so they can't even fly in a swing, which is something that I think all of us love to do. Also, the way to get onto most play structures are steps and poles and those climby things. And so if you're in a wheelchair, there's no way for you to interact. Your friends are all running around and high up, and you're stuck down below. We carried him a lot of the time. He weighed little enough that we could do that. But as he got older, that was a real challenge. Just because playgrounds meet ADA regulations doesn't mean that they actually are set up so that they can be inclusive places where all can play. And so what we are proposing is something different, a place where everyone can play. So Bennett was just one of our community members who struggled to be included in play spaces. We know many community members with a wide range of abilities who would benefit from this playground. There are more than 9,000 local residents under the age of 65 with a disability in this area, and once you get to the age of 65, 1 in 3 have a disability. That doesn't include those people who have temporary injuries or have health issues that aren't defined as having a disability. So there's a huge community out there that we don't get to think about that actually don't get to access our play spaces. Also, we have amazing medical facilities in this area, and we have friends who traveled 9 hours for treatment here for SMA, and they had to come in a couple days before for tests. There was very limited opportunities for them to interact in our city. And I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk a little bit about what we're talking about when we're talking about an all abilities playground.
Thank you. So, like Kara said before, just because a playground meets ADA compliance does not mean that it is an all abilities playground. And it's definitely not accessible for the vast majority of folks that have disabilities. An all abilities playground, which have been popping up all over the country, is more about a general philosophy and is a huge departure from how we think about traditional playgrounds. Yes, there is accessible equipment, but it really is about mindful design. When we design all abilities playground, we think about lots of different populations. Those that are mobility limited, those that are developmentally delayed, those that have sensory or processing disability, as well as those that are affected by age and temporary illness. Thank you. This is a picture of a wonderful treehouse that was at the Ark Park in Richmond. The beautiful thing about this, if you can see in the background, is that it has an enormous ramp that kids that are mobility limited can go up to. Just the notion of being above everybody else when you're used to being in a wheelchair is hugely empowering. The fact that it has a ramp means that kids can go up there, as well as older or mobility limited adults. If you're developmentally delayed and are wheelchair bound, there's been equipment developed, and this is all relatively recently, which enables you to do things like swing, which is something that is so basic to playground equipment. Getting to the swings is a huge problem, and having a larger structure around the swing that enables you to do that is part of what the mindful design of an all abilities playground is all about. In the Ark Park Richmond, there are also sensory elements where people that just really either cannot see or like to have the stimulation of a focused sensory experience can get joy and be social with other kids. Seating and shaded area is a huge part of an all abilities playground, enabling parents that desperately need a rest to look around and have a good vantage point of the park, because sometimes kids that are moving around have a tendency to wander off, and having visibility is a huge part of an all abilities park. So the problem is that there's really nothing very close to us. There's a huge population in the Charlottesville area. The closest parks that we would have to go to would be the Ark Park or Soar Park in Richmond, and that was over an hour away. We would have loved to have Bennett experience that social interaction with more of his friends, but not many people were willing to go an hour. And I think it's pretty unreasonable to ask our community members to drive an hour to have access to play.
So last spring, Bennett's friends and family were devastated when he passed away suddenly from complications from the flu. At times of such loss, I think you can turn inward or you can turn outward with your grief, and we chose to look outward. So we founded Bennett's Village in order to build a playground that Bennett and his friends could have had truly equitable opportunities to play. Our goal is to build a multi-generational, all-abilities playground in our community and to advocate for more inclusive spaces for everyone in our community. The Arc of the Piedmont is our partner and serves as our fiscal sponsor. Over the last year, we've shared our vision and had overwhelming numbers of community support. We've had more than 15 fundraising partners combined with over 600 individual donors, and we've raised almost $100,000 just by telling Bennett's story. We don't have plans, we don't have anything specific, just this dream. We've had some opportunities to do some outreach. We have gone into the classroom. We've worked with middle school students, some of which are in the audience here. We've worked with elementary school students. I have worked with several classes at the University of Virginia, some graduate students working on the Charlottesville Equity Atlas. I also worked with an architecture class that looked at inclusive design. And we also look forward to talking with other community groups. We've done some interviews and we look forward to doing some more.
So the reason why we're coming here tonight is because we do have a plan. We've been talking to the City of Charlottesville Parks and Rec. Mr. Daly and Bennett's Village has been working very closely together. And we have a proposal to make. Based on our model, which is the Arc Park in Richmond, we would like to propose that we create an all-abilities park in Charlottesville. Based on that model, we estimate the size of that park to be about 2.5 acres, and the projected cost is $5 million. The interesting part of our proposal is that we suggest that Charlottesville provides the land that is already within the scope of how that land would be used, and that Bennett Village provides funds for the design, equipment, and construction of the park. We propose that Penn Park, which is already designated a regional destination park, be tapped as the site of Bennett's Village. It is already consistent with the current usage of Penn Park. It would meet a community and regional need, and it fits the criteria that we would ask for an all-abilities playground.
So what do we need tonight? We are asking City Council, is an all-abilities playground consistent with the regional park designation of Penn Park? Is it consistent with the existing uses of the park so it wouldn't require, adapting to the creating a new master plan? We're asking you to authorize Parks and Rec to create a memorandum of agreement with Bennett's Village and to move forward with planning so that we can do engagement with the community. We can start seriously raising the funds and designing some site-specific plans after we receive community feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Daly,
Yes, ma'am.
and Mr. Murphy, just where are we in the process? Because this is just a report tonight. So what are next steps?
The next steps would be if there's support from the council to move forward with establishing a partnership with Bennett's Village for this purpose. There's a draft resolution in your council packet to that effect. I would direct staff to go ahead and begin drafting a memorandum of agreement that would outline the relationship between the city and Bennett's Village for this purpose, with some specificity about responsibilities of the city, responsibilities of Bennett's Village, and those items that we would share responsibility for. And we can work directly with them to affect that agreement. We have something of a model that we've used for previous partnerships that can serve as a place to start with this effort. I will add that staff are wholeheartedly supportive of this. There is a need in this community for such a facility, and to have a community partner who has already done so much amazing work to make this a reality is very, very exciting.
Okay. All right. So what do you need from us?
I think that, you have this draft resolution. We weren't intending for you to act on it this evening. Ask that you consider that we put that on the next agenda for your consideration. I'm in support of what Mr. Daly has drafted, so if you're prepared to consider this in April, then we'll be bringing it back.
All right. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I just want to thank you all and express condolences, of course. I was recently at the ARC, or I guess now, in Richmond with 4 kids, all little, not with ability or disability issues. It's an extraordinary park. I think anybody should invest this 70-minute trip to hang out there with kids if you can, or just as adults. It is a totally different kind of playground, and it is really just transformative to hang out in. And I remember when we were there, I was like, there ought to be something like this in Charlottesville, because it will become a destination, and it just is a different experience of a playground. So I think you're absolutely right. It will bring something totally new for a whole universe of people here, and it would be very in keeping with our values. So I really applaud what you've done.
Mayor Walker, I'd like to say something too. I just want to say that I'm in awe of Bennett's parents' fortitude to move forward, and your inspiration from your son. It's really inspirational for all of us. So thank you for your courage and for seeking the partnership with the city, because it's an honor to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you for the middle school children for coming.
Okay, so next we have the proposed real estate tax rate for fiscal year 2020. And Mr. Murphy will present.
All right, Mayor Walker, members of council. This is a presentation that's going to have a lot of familiarity to the council members and certainly to the folks who've been to many of our budget sessions. But for the purposes of this presentation this evening and the benefit of those who have not been at all our meetings, we will do a little bit of a review of the proposed budget. And I'll just point out that there are a total of 4 budget public hearings. There will be one presentation that will cover all of those, and then you can take each of those public hearings one by one. So this is to indicate to you all that over the past 13 or 14 years that you'll see that there are years of increase and decrease, but in all but one year there was increase in the general fund budget. This year the general increase is 5.05% of the budget. There is some good news in the indicators here in the city. We have more jobs than we've ever had within the city. Unemployment is the lowest in the state. Vacancy rates are low, and there are lots of major developments that will increase the tax base. The council agreed to organizing the budget around some themes. You can see that among them are support for the schools, investment in employees, affordable housing, and of course being efficient in our local government, among others. This slide had a question about this generally a little bit earlier, so you will see that while we talk about taxes, particularly tonight as we have a number of public hearings, that about 3/4, just under 73% of all the money that comes in to fund the general fund in the local budget is from different types of taxes, including real estate, personal property, meals, lodging, etc. So real estate is part of the proposed budget. You can see that in general there has been some increase, and that's due to the change in assessed value. That the manager's budget, while there has been an advertisement saying that it is possible for the council to endorse a real estate rate of 96 or 7 cents or somewhere in between based on our advertisement, that the budget is balanced in the manager's budget at the current 95-cent rate. For those who have been coming to our public forums and work sessions, you will know that tomorrow night the manager's office will present some additional modifications to the budget based on the idea of a 1-1-1 scenario that was discussed on Saturday, which is 1 cent on real estate, 1 cent on lodging, 1 on meals. The 1 cent on lodging and meals was already in the current budget from the city manager. This is just to indicate to folks that, obviously we can't capture every unique dwelling in the city, but since we know what the average rate of increase is, to give you some notion that based on the different values of homes in the city, that we know that if they went up roughly 8.7% on the residential side, how much more tax people are going to pay in the coming year. And we obviously are looking at some increases pretty much across the board. There are certainly areas of the city that are affected more than others. Just a reminder, since we're talking about a potential change in the formula, that each penny of the real estate tax is worth $771,000+. So we have been looking at, particularly in comparison, the different types of revenues, some information from Bureau of Labor Statistics, Consumer Expenditure Survey, and it was divided into deciles. And so we tried to do that with all the residential parcels in the city too. I think what stands out here is number one, that when you get halfway through all those residential parcels, that the values of the parcels or the homes are still under $300,000, and that as we have considered the CHAP program, the Housing Affordability Program, and the tax relief that the manager's budget proposes, and Mayor Walker has requested that we go even further with, that 70% of all homes in the city actually fall under the assessed value that we're talking about. So this is a graphic about the meals tax. We're proposing in the budget that the meals tax change from 5% to 6%. It was last changed in 4 fiscal years ago. I know that there's been significant discussion around this point. Would emphasize just a couple things here. One is that meals tax has consistently grown. There was no year where a penny was worth less than any other year, and that this tax is worth approximately just under $2.5 million per penny. As we talk about what it means to go from 5% to 6%. I want to emphasize that going up that 1 cent keeps the city at or below 27 of the 38 independent cities in the state of Virginia, and the actual impact, the the out of pocket cost, is the equivalent of 10 cents on a sandwich that costs $10, or 20 cents on a $20 meal, so forth and so on. So I referenced before that there was some work that we looked at in some federal level data, and so we just wanted to be able to compare and understand that, does this and how does this affect people in their general budgets. And you'll see that in the lowest income brackets in the nation, that our proposed tax increase on meals would affect people $15 a year, or $1.25 generally out of their monthly budgets, and even at the highest income, $6.43 per month. And that 35% of meals tax is paid by people who do not live in the city. We've also talked about in this budget a proposal to change from 7% to 8%. That did change 3 fiscal years ago. And this occupancy tax in hotels is something that has been climbing in the city as far as revenues go. If we were to raise the rate, that we would be basically equal to or lower than half, 19 out of the 38 independent cities. and that while there is significant data and public comment around the idea that the lodging sector has been shrinking, that is true of us regionally, and we do have a regional partnership for the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the CACVB. However, in the city, we've been up over the last year about 9.4%, and in the county down 14%. This is just to emphasize, where does the money go? When you pay your taxes to the city, you'll see that about a third of all dollars go towards our local contribution to the schools, followed by a quarter of the money to public safety and justice. I want to clarify there that since one of our public speakers at a previous meeting equated that all to a direct appropriation to police, that's police, fire, sheriffs, jails, detention center, all of that together. And then Healthy Families and Communities, the work that you do to fund social services, human services, nonprofits, et cetera, follows that. And of course, infrastructure and transportation next. Much smaller amounts on all the remainder. Would emphasize, you see that debt service payment has continued to grow a bit over time. So talked briefly prior to this about the CHAP, the Affordable Housing Tax Grant and Relief Program. The manager's budget was already based on a concept that would increase the funding to that program by $285,000. And how that happened was both looking at how much relief households get and also increasing the income threshold from $50,000 per household up to $65,000. Council will be, remember that at the most recent discussions on this, we are also, at your request, analyzing what it would mean to look at changing the income threshold just to $55,000 instead of $65,000, and trying to give as much relief as possible. There are some proposals out there that would take us up to full relief, all the way up to either $20,000 or $25,000 in income. So. We talked a little bit about expenditure drivers. You know that about a third of all our money goes to schools. The total contribution of $57.3 million in FY20 is an increase of over $3.3 million, or 6.2% in the coming year. I would tell you that, by formula, you have conventionally had a policy about devoting some new revenues, 40% of it to the schools. Based on that formula, we would have contributed an additional $2.2 million this year. So obviously you're exceeding that by a good amount. And you continued to have some discussion as recently as our weekend public forum about whether we could meet the original schools request, which was at $3.8 million. So, in addition to those operational side needs, there is also the matter of what we fund in the capital side for the schools. There's $6.5 million in the coming year for the schools in the FY20 budget. $3 million of that is really to study and move forward with the planning design of the school reconfiguration that's been discussed, and to prepare you for understanding what it may take in the $55 to $80 million range for that reconfiguration. The other $3.5 million is for significant renovations that happen each year in the schools, kind of in a rolling fashion throughout the stock of the schools, since we have 9 or 10 buildings to maintain there. So you'll see that part of this budget is also to invest in employees, to take another step in what I think was rightly pointed out in our budget forum the other day, a new level of minimum wage in the city for city employees of $15 per hour, which is an increase of 4.17%. And we use that same number in the proposed budget as the cost of living adjustment for all employees for several reasons. One is because we have a number of employees, including in public safety, who are at that 1440 level, who will need to continue to move up, that we have not traditionally funded enough for compression issues, and we have a lot of evidence that we're behind market in a number of departments. It also actualizes the mid-year adjustment in sworn police officers, which happened earlier at 4.83%. So we're taking on that expense annualized for the next year. We're doing this without any change in the healthcare premiums for employees. We've had good cost experience in the past year, and in launching some new initiatives about online benefits and self-service. So there were a lot of new requests from departments. I want you to understand that we did not fund over $5 million worth of new requests, but there are a handful of changes that I think are significant to highlight for you. One is to give a half of year's funding, so to ask people to wait half the year to implement a requested position as a centralized safety coordinator, be housed in risk management, and help us advance the training and education that will help us in every department to make safer workplaces. The security manager, which will be housed in the police department, but is really a full citywide initiative looking at building safety, event planning, and a number of other initiatives that certainly we have emphasized over the last 2 years. DMV Select, this is kind of an enhancement. As you're aware, Mr. Vandiver has brought this forward for the year that we're in. Our DMV is the second busiest in the state, and that's why people wait a long time out there. He has a half-time employee who will move to full-time, and that's what this expense is. We believe we'll realize additional revenue beyond that expense. One of the primary recommendations of the efficiency study in the Department of Neighborhood Development Services was to hire a support services manager underneath the assistant director, who currently has 15 direct reports, and we're implementing that at the mid-year in order to just save some dollars and balance the budget. I'd like to get more and more of our transit drivers into regular full-time status and into benefited roles to increase the reliability of our system and to provide, those benefits to folks. When we first began to analyze this, it looked like only 2/3 of all routes are able to be staffed by our full-time regular drivers. Seems like we want to move towards a standard that is more in the 85 to 90% range. Like to have had the money to, maybe hire as many as, or convert as many as 14 of these drivers. We're proposing 4 at this time. And we've had an efficiency. We're moving out of Public Works and into the Utilities Department, so there's general fund savings because it will be dealt with in the regular rate, our stormwater maintenance operations. So this is a year where we've talked a lot about ABRT and the idea that, as there's some discussion about process changes and a work group that was kind of brought together by the mayor, that we've kind of held harmless folks and froze those dollars. There's a couple things I want to highlight here. We did start mid-year with some dollars that were previously appropriated by council, a therapeutic docket. The fiscal agent is Offender Aid and Restoration, but this is in the General District Court, specifically meant to assist people with mental health concerns who are interacting with the criminal justice system. I think it's a great enhancement to the system. We propose to continue funding that going forward. And there are some agencies that are not your traditional 501c3 nonprofits who we have either kind of a quasi-governmental or contractual relationship with, and you'll see that Jaunt and the library have some increases, and that all the public safety agencies at the jail, detention center, and ECC are showing some decreases. And those are all based on our formulas in our agreements. So our debt service is going to increase based on some of the spending in the CIP by about $850,000 per year. And you did at year end in December allocate $3.2 million towards affordable housing initiatives. That's part of how we fund some of the things in the first year of the CIP that we'll talk about in a moment. So the CIP has over $35 million in year one. It is the budget that you're approving. And of course, the out years, the next 4 years are your plan. I would point out that there's $10.3 million in investment in affordable housing, and that, the schools, as previously mentioned, are also a very significant expense. You see some of the other things that are part of this budget. Go ahead. So, with all that said, most of the time that we spend in the deliberations during February and March are about what didn't make it in, right? So we've been looking at that. You're aware that we're still discussing at Dr. Bellamy's request whether there's any additional money for the full operating request of the schools. We had agreed earlier to fund the $3 million, but there were not really, we don't have the data yet to figure out what should go towards school reconfiguration. There is quite a bit of discussion about whether we should include some flexible dollars that can be applied for in the CIP in the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund. You can see by how the budget is constructed in the CIP that, it looks like there's some zeros across that line, which is true. That's because we've prescribed ahead of time where that money should go. And so the most money that's ever been devoted that I'm aware of to affordable housing in the city was $3.9 million in any given year, and this budget's at $10.3 million. So we talked about CHAP. There's some scenarios out there we're going to revisit. We have some new scenarios with Mr. Divers, Commissioner Divers, that we'll talk about tomorrow night. Our departments, just in their base budgets, when we looked at some of the things that are the council and community priorities, we said we're going to have to make some cuts ourselves. And so $1.39 million was taken out of departmental operation requests. And there was an additional $5.3 million in new things that departments asked to do that we did not put into the budget. And I know that this is a really big capital budget, and there's this big item out here looming for the schools, but just to put it all in perspective, there's almost $110 million in departmental proposals for capital expenses that did not make it into our plan. What'd you say? Tell me more. So, we do have a couple of additional meetings. We're here tonight. There's going to be 4 public hearings on the budget. We're going to be at a work session tomorrow night, depending on our progress there. We may meet next Wednesday evening with the hope that in 2 weeks we'll be back in front of council for our second public hearing on the budget and the first reading with the goal of doing budget approval 2 p.m. April the 8th. So, as always, we try and keep all of this up to date and available for the public at charlottesville.org/budget, and happy to answer any and all questions from council, but really the purpose of our discussion tonight is to hear from the public as much as possible for the public hearings.
This is what I'll say. Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, any questions, council? No? All right. So Carolyn, it looks like Carolyn Belt.
My name is Carolyn Belt, and I've been a citizen in Charlottesville for 71 years. I've signed every paper, I think, up there. But I wanted to thank Ms. Walker, our mayor, for trying to find out if our tax money is being spent the way it should be, and if we are getting any results. I think that has been one thing about you that I've liked. And not other things too, but you really have cared. She is trying to use checks and balances to see if we are wasting our money or if it's just being put, or if it's being put to good use. The school system has always gone over budget, and we still have one of the nation's largest educational gaps between white students and African Americans in the nation, and we found that out from the New York Times paper. We don't even know how many students go to school in the city. I have never seen a number. Have we dropped from last year? What is the number of students in the last 5 years? And are we improving? Where are the checks and balances in the school system? What methods have they tried, and what has worked and what hasn't? Do we have any of this data anywhere? Because I have never seen it. Children who are having problems reading can't get the attention they need in a large classroom. Do we have more volunteers to help teachers in large classrooms? Are our teachers afraid to speak up because of the principal or higher ups? Maybe we need some whistleblowers. Let the teachers write to our mayor and tell her what they think is wrong in the classroom and their ideas to fix it. Murray School seems to be doing well with students with smaller class sizes and a variety of classes. When the school system tells us what is wrong, maybe I would feel more inclined to spend my tax dollars on the schools. But right now, I think we're wasting our money.
Thank you. The real estate. Yeah, I got the first one.
Real estate's first on the agenda. Yes, absolutely.
All right, Mark Cavett.
Good evening. I know that you all know the issues, so there's no sense in my going over those with you and what my concerns were. But what I do want to say is people are moving out of the city. I know in my neighborhood, I know of a couple that's been there longer than I've been. And once, after a 3-year period of time, their taxes went from $400 a month to $800 a month. And they decided that it was time to move out, and they moved over to the county. A few years ago, the house next door to me, they spent quite a bit of money fixing the house up, remodeling it. After the 5-year freeze was over, they saw the taxes go up to $10,000 a month. And she decided to, $10,000 a year. And she decided to sell, and she couldn't afford it. It was her dream house where she was hoping to retire to. So, people are moving out. We need to increase the limits of the tax relief for disabled and seniors, as well as look at some of the other categories that we have and bring those up. I know there's some question, I was told, because state law doesn't allow certain things to be changed over to a certain limit. So maybe that's something you take on one of these days. Rent on affordable housing goes up when we raise up the rates. A landlord who sees high increases is just going to pass it on to the tenants, and it makes the property that much more expensive for somebody. I'm actually facing this myself, where I've been seeing double-digit increases. One of the reasons I bought my house is the fact that it did have a apartment to it. And I've tried to keep the rent on extremely low, way below market value, but I had to make a decision this year when my current tenant moves out to increase it by about 13%. I want to mention something that I've discovered that's taking place in New York City and some other cities around the country that may be something that you all might want to look at. And that some other cities have multiple layers of real estate tax. So I don't know what New York City does. I know that they have 4 levels. I don't know what those 4 levels equal to, but maybe someone who buys a new house or new construction gets taxed at one rate. Someone that's been living in the same house for 20 years, maybe another rate. Disabled individuals, maybe another rate. So that may be something that needs to be looked at. Of course, there's also one other thing that can be done. We just need to not spend as much. I don't personally mind spending a little bit more if the money's going into affordable housing to especially buy maybe land to put away for future use. I'd be happy with that. But what worries me is the fact that maybe seeing multiple year after year after year double-digit increases. That pushes people out. Then there's a question is, what are you going to do next year to increase revenue? So that may be something that needs to be thought about too. Thank you.
Thank you. Kimber Hawkey.
Good evening. A lot of what I'm talking about has already been discussed, but I'm just here to state what our situation is. My name is Kimber Hawkey. I'm a long-term resident of Belmont and a homeowner since 2004. We took out 2 mortgages to buy our house back in Belmont 15 years ago, back when everyone said, don't move into that neighborhood, it's the drug neighborhood. Well, we went in and we bought the house, almost lost the house to the bank when the economic crash happened, and we both lost our jobs. And we've been fighting to keep our house ever since. We've had plans to renovate the 100-year-old house since the very beginning. However, with the oppressive rise in assessments, which for us is over 13% this year, that hardly seems possible. And one other issue that's not been brought up about the assessments is that magically this year we have an extra bedroom on our house. All of a sudden we've gone from a 4 to a 5-bedroom house. Don't know how that happened. And we also have a new greenhouse in our backyard. I guess because we threw some plastic over the plants that we had there. And if you look on the picture, they actually have a little like a shed or something, and there's nothing even there. So there's a problem in the assessment office, more than just the problem of crazy assessment rises. And so in addition to all this crazy assessment, you're now looking to raise our taxes even more. And it just seems like we're being doubly taxed. And it doesn't seem like people are moving out. It seems like people are being pushed out. So last year, there were $41 million in added inventory to the property tax base from what we saw according to the assessment documents. So aren't you already earning a lot more in tax money? And why not use that instead of increasing our taxes? There are also a lot more developments, as you can see on the PDF forms from the Neighborhood Development Services. More development coming our way. So again, why tax us further? So let's look at some solutions, perhaps. I'm no expert, but it seems like the fact that UVA pays nothing is crazy. Why? How is that even possible? Why is it that their luxury apartments are going to increase neighbors' taxes? That doesn't seem right either. There seems to be that there could be a fashion to grandfather in long-term residents, have a tiered system according to how long someone has lived in their house. Also, there was a big article in the CEVA Weekly recently and about the 9.5 acres that the city is using to park cars in. Why isn't something being done with that land instead of just parking cars there? Seems also that you could combine city and county offices to save costs, as someone else has pointed out as well. Like I said, I'm no expert. There are other solutions, and we want to stay in our house. Thank you.
Thank you. Colette Hall.
Colette Hall, and I'm also speaking for my husband, Kelton Flynn, who could not be here. I live in Robertson Lane in the city. Good evening, Ms. Mayor and councilors and Mr. Murphy. First, I want to thank Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Beauregard, and their staffs for the year-long efforts they put into the annual budget and budget presentation. A thankless job, but the most important task so the council can discern and decide city funding. An article in the Daily Progress, February 1st, 2019, headlined, Council discusses possible tax rate increases. Quote, an average of 7.9% increase in assessed property values in 2018. As usual, our house has gone up more than the average residential assessment, this year up 8.09%. Our assessment has gone up 16 years out of the past 20 years, or over 425% increase. Percent change since 2017 is 15.01%. Yes, that's correct. It's 15.01% increase. And by the way, we're talking about a small to modest 1,500 square feet residential house on a small lot. I have heard the restaurateurs complain because the council wants to raise the meal tax by 1%. So I propose a trade. You pay my 15% increase, and I'll pay your 1% increase. Saturday, I attended the Community Budget Forum. I heard multiple speakers say, quote, "Raise my taxes and I will gladly pay more taxes." I should have gotten their names and phone numbers. I would propose they pay my 15% increase and I will pay the rest. This would be win-win. They would be paying the city more in taxes, as they wish, and I would pay a lesser amount, albeit still high. An increase in the tax rate is unjust and unequitable. We will already be paying 8.09% higher in taxes. In fact, anyone whose assessment has increased will be paying higher taxes even without a tax rate increase. The solution is for council to spend millions less. For example, spending millions on multiple consultant studies for the same projects, like the Belmont Bridge or downtown parking, or 1/3 of the city budget, $57.3 million for schools who need to produce good outcomes, as nonprofits are expected to do when they request city funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Vogel.
Again, my name is Jeff Fogel. I live in Belmont. You need a sustained source of revenue if you're going to fulfill the commitment that you're making to affordable housing. There's several things that I don't think you've taken into account. For example, in my own personal situation, I bought a house 12 years ago. It was assessed at the purchase price. The economy then tanked. The value of my house, according to assessments, went down significantly and has only gotten back to where I was in 2006. So this year, I'm paying the same taxes that I paid in 2006. And I can't be the only one in town who's in that situation. Secondly, obviously you need a much more robust system of rebates for taxes for homeowners, and also including the impact on renters as well. But in the long term, the question is, where are you going to be able to sustain the money and the commitment that you're making? And the only place is in real estate taxes. And the question is, how do we have a progressive tax system that affords us income without harming the people who would be harmed, some of whom have spoken here tonight? As an aside, I couldn't not say, the people who are concerned about white people moving out of this town should look at what's happened to black people. 54% of the people in this town were black in 1864, and now it's 19%. Now, what happened to your concerns about people moving out of town that reduced that population to a minority? That has to be a concern as well. And if you look at the demographics, you'll see that the principal demographic that's leaving town is black and poor because they can't afford it, not middle class or rich. But we've got a lot of rich people in our town, and they can afford to pay more taxes. And let's recall that one of the issues in town is the huge and humongous discrepancy in wealth and income. The way our economy is set up, there's only one way to affect that, and that's taxation. And since the people who actually were going to pay more taxes under a Democratic regime in Washington ended up paying less taxes because of a Republican regime. So now we have rich people paying considerably less taxes than they would have paid had the Democrats, most of whom they supported, been in office. So there is that pot of money for those people, which will not hurt them. It will only bring them back to what they voted for when they voted for Hillary Clinton. So those people have accepted the notion that they pay more taxes. We need those taxes. The only way you're going to be able to fulfill the commitment to affordable housing is to have a sustained source of income. That's it. It will help also decrease the huge disparity in income in town. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the real estate tax?
I would just like to echo some of the concerns that folks have had here. Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Aaron Winston. I'm an organizer with the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition and a resident of the city. Real estate taxes are going to be a necessary evil in the current legal framework that our city operates in. We can't have an income tax in Charlottesville, unfortunately. So the question remains, like, how do we have a real estate tax that is progressive? And I think you are on the right track with the tax abatement program. If done right, we can use this to reduce the impact of rising assessments and tax rates on our city's most vulnerable citizens. But that leaves a lot of money out there that we are able to get at. This money is vital for operating our city, not only for commitments to affordable housing, but to balance a budget. The fact that there's over $100 million in unfunded requests in the general fund the CIP is sobering. That's a lot of work that we need to do to maintain the infrastructure in our town. And we're not going to make a dent in that if we're just robbing Peter to pay Paul and move money around to important commitments. This money has to come from somewhere. So I encourage you to raise the real estate tax rate, but only if and when that is coupled with robust tax abatement for the city's low-income population.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the real estate tax? You've already been up, right?
But that wasn't real estate tax. That was about the budget.
Yeah, no, that was just a
Well, okay. But the thing is this, if you raise the
Well, no, there, yeah, okay. All right, is there anyone else who would like to?
Hi, Walt Heineke, 1521 Amber Street. So I want to first commend the council for making a commitment to affordable housing in this town. I think we need to take a step. When I start thinking about these issues, I always start with how it's going to affect me, right? How my assessment's going to go up, how my taxes are going to go up. I think we really need to reframe how we're thinking about this. We're here because people who look like me didn't stand up against racial covenants, against redlining, against decimating Vinegar Hill, and against racist zoning. That's why we're here today talking about affordable housing. That's why we have an affordable housing crisis. And finally, council is addressing the affordable housing crisis in a substantive manner, and I commend you for that. We have a housing study that shows us that we have 3,300 units of affordable housing. We're in the hole, 3,300 units, and it's going to take us quite a while to get there. Your own HAC, your Housing Advisory Committee, figured out that it would take us about 15 years to fix that problem, and they backtracked it, and it looks like it's going to cost about $150 million. So that's about a $10 million commitment per year. That's why we're supporting a real estate increase, because it's a long-term problem that needs a long-term solution. So I'm happy to see the 1 cent increase supported by 3 of you on Saturday. I have been listening to Councilor Hill's concerns that a real estate increase just gets passed on by owners to renters. And so that's why I really think that we should maybe start thinking about doubling down on programs like the CHAP and programs like CSRAP and anything else that actually gets us to the progressive kind of tax that we really need. And I'm thinking that maybe we should even, I hate to say this because I know you're not going to want to hear it, but maybe 111 isn't enough. Maybe we need to add to get to a larger threshold for supporting people who are being hit by real estate assessments, by being hit by real estate taxes and meal taxes or whatever. We need to get the threshold up. That's how you do progressive change in a town like this. And let's face it, the federal government is not coming over the hill to save us. The state government is not coming over the hill to save us. We are finally on our own. And how you respond to this reflects the values of this community in a way that implicates what's happened with 2017 in a national conversation about racism and white nationalism, and it also reflects about our awakening to our historical discrimination in this town, generations of historical discrimination. So I urge you to really think about doubling down in a way that gets you more in CHAP, that gets you more in CSRAP, so that you can address some of the problems, the issues that have been brought up today. Because in the capital of resistance, that's how we roll.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the real estate tax?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Brad Slocum, and I promise I'll be brief. I just don't think we need to reinvent the wheel on some of this stuff. There are many communities around the country dealing with this exact same issue. I can only speak from my experience as far as the city of Ithaca dealing with Cornell University and to a lesser extent Ithaca College right on their doorstep. To my knowledge, Cornell University pays zero or close to zero taxes on their land, and the city of Ithaca is dealing also with affordable housing issues and where to generate revenue. They are working on solutions. I wish I had more details to offer, but I'm sure there are other cities throughout the country that are trying to figure this out. I'm sure there's tons of state and federal level things with trying to tax UVA as far as how they can contribute to this community, but I don't see them in this room. I'm sure they may be involved in some of the other discussions, but I'd really just like to echo the sentiments that have been made earlier as far as this needing to be a sustainable thing. I did some quick math, and the gentleman earlier with the $400-something thousand assessment, putting that in 1998 dollars, that would have put his $55,000 home at $250,000. So somehow in 20 years, his home and land got 5 times more valuable. I don't know what the house looks like, but I think the comments about the pressure from other projects somehow raising assessments and things like that need to be looked at too, the tax breaks, all that kind of thing, because it has to be a sustainable solution. I'm not saying just go beat up UVA for money, even though we definitely should. But that has to be looked at in a sustainable way. It can't just be a one-time, have them hand us a bag of coins and walk away and say, we did our part. There have to be longer-term solutions, and there's something right on our doorstep that can definitely be looked at. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Ithaca's mayor is Savante Merrick. We can ask him. I'm gonna shoot him a text. See what they're doing.
That'd be a great idea. Nancy Carpenter, I'm here speaking in support of a tax increase, but first I want to acknowledge the frustration and pain I hear from a lot of people who have been up here before in front of you talking about how they want to maintain their residency in this city and how difficult it's become because of assessments, not necessarily because of the tax rate, because it is 95. Apparently it was $1.13 some years ago before the crash in 2008. So that seems to be an issue. I know that when a couple of years ago, some of my neighbors called me and talked to me about the assessments that they had in their neighborhood and why. I mean, the land is still the land. Nothing's really changed on it other than what we give it as a value, which is certainly, can go up and down. But one of the things I wanted to say is that I agree with a sustainable revenue source for affordable housing. Because if any of you have been watching the news, Mr. Trump came up with his 2020 budget, which is his budget, kind of like what the city manager's budget is, and the Congress will work on it. But when it comes to housing, he's talking about zeroing out CDBG, zeroing out home, zeroing out, I think, under public housing operating monies, zero, and significantly cutting the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which will significantly affect elderly, disabled, and families. So in looking at the long run, we do need to have that sustainable source, but I think there's also room to even increase tax relief for the people that feel like they're being pushed out. It's a class war. It can also be racial equity, that there does need to, I think, be an expansion of that type of tax relief, because we are going to go to higher density housing. And if higher density housing is going to be a little more expensive, you're going to have more people in the city to share the burden of the real estate tax, which funds our schools, because we do want children that get a good education in our public school systems so that they want to stay in their home communities, or they want to go to a university and come back to their home community because they can, because they like it, good memories maybe. So hopefully you will adopt the one I would prefer to, but if 1% is what gets it this time around, then let's go 1%. But let's look at expanding the income levels for your CHAP program and other interventions, because I am a renter. I choose to be a renter. homeowner at this age in my life. I don't want to be a homeowner again. And, you know, there are interventions that can help tenants. It could be in the form of, I know there's some landlords in here, but it could be in the form of perhaps some type of rent control, if Virginia allows that. Mr. Blair, I'm sure, could address that. But there are interventions that can be done. There are other funds that you all have in your budget that can be perhaps more robust to help tenants if they feel the effects. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll be super quick. I wanted to take Tanisha Hudson's advice and commend this council, commend Mr. Murphy about this amazing budget. It is historic, and I think we should recognize that. And it's also breaking a long tradition of disinvestment and exclusion, not just in the city, but across the nation. And so you are moving in the right direction. These commitments must be permanent and long-term. Just like Walt said, the HAC is looking at $150 million price tag for the needs of this city. Honestly, the how is up to you. The 111, the meals tax, I don't think that CLIC has like a strong feeling one way or another about these directions. And also, Legal Aid Justice Center is happy to work with the city. I heard a lot of ideas tonight with regard to a graduation tax, thinking about tax relief ideas, and also looking at different areas of the city to try to protect homeowners. We agree that that's an issue. And so the only ask that I have is with regard to the tax relief issue to increase the tax relief that is available. We actually have an infographic here from about 2017, I believe, and I just have a copy for each of you. I think there's a camera here, just of the homeownership that has decreased of Black homeownership in the city of Charlottesville since 2000. It's gone down by 23%, and this is because of the increase in taxes. So, you know, this is an issue. We're not poo-pooing that part away, and I think that the tax relief is a way to deal with that issue, and increasing the caps will make a difference. I actually we have clients that come into our office often who have these issues, and they might have applied for the tax relief program, but it's not enough. They need more, and those levels are way too low. But again, I commend you. We encourage you to increase the CAF contribution as well as the rent subsidy voucher program. And here is my
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Brandon Collins. I live in Charlottesville. I've lived here my entire life. I have 3 children who've lived here their entire lives. I've paid attention to city government for a very long time, and every year this conversation happens about assessments. And I know it's been particularly rough over the past few years in terms of rising assessments, but it's always been a way to pass the buck and get council off the hook for raising taxes and raising money through the assessments. And you know, it's part of the growing pains we're going to have to understand and get a handle on as we approach the affordable housing crisis, which you are doing. You've seen the numbers. You've got the housing assessment. You've seen the tool put forward by the HAC. You can see we have about a $500 million, with a B, billion-dollar affordable housing crisis in Charlottesville. And your investment of $150 million over a period of years could realize that and could significantly change things. And you're going to come up with that money, and like Mr. Heineke said, you have to have a funding stream to make that happen. As we look at that, we have to look at all versions. It's not just units that need to be built, though we need to build a lot. We need to have many different types of interventions in terms of the city voucher program, home ownership, the CAF, and all this. And we can't talk about affordable home ownership unless we're talking about some kind of tax relief, right? There are contradictions built into our economy that are just going to be a pain for us to deal with in Charlottesville. We live in the Confederate state, the Dillon Rule state of Virginia, and that makes things really difficult. And we know these are challenges we're going to have to do. So we have to incorporate that into our housing strategy plan as we craft that over the next year. But it's vitally important to get that funding. I support a real estate increase. I'm a homeowner. It's really hard. I almost hate it and I wish I had never done it. I'm going to keep my home because I love this city, right? But we need this tax relief and we need as much as we can get. So as we raise the real estate tax, we really need to raise those caps for tax relief and just go for it. End of the day, every cent you spend has nothing to do with all the analysis and all the historical stuff, all this stuff that I like to talk about all the time. Big dreams, lots of analysis. At the end of the day, every cent you spend means one child is not sleeping in a car, is not sleeping in a hotel. There are seniors who are not dying early from the poor quality of life. We're talking about thousands of people in this city that you can have an impact on, and that's where those cents go, cents on the dollar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speak briefly as well. Michael Payne, city resident, renter in Belmont. I would just encourage council to really prioritize expanding the CHAP program to the maximum amount that you think you can do it. I think we've heard a lot of testimony from folks about why that's important. And I'd also just say I'm glad the conversation around assessments is happening because I think it hits a part of the affordable housing crisis that we don't discuss enough, which is land speculation and the fact that whether we raise or reduce the real estate tax, assessments are still going to go up. And a lot of that does not actually have to do with supply and demand. That's part of it, but a lot of it is land speculation of a cycle of when investors see assessment rising, they see an investment opportunity, and they will hold on to land or try to invest in land with the explicit goal of flipping it, which only further increases assessments. Other cities have gone through this cycle. We're going through this cycle right now, and the question is how to stop that cycle. And I think a lot of that has to happen, a lot of council's policies, but some things outside of council. And I would just encourage council and the community to really explore the value of community land trusts as a way to decommodify land and stop this cycle. Because if we're not utilizing community land trusts and figuring out ways to acquire land and get it into the hands of the housing authority or a land trust, we could spend millions of dollars and in 50 years not make nearly as much a dent as we thought we could, or we might be unable to stop this cycle of displacement in working class neighborhoods. And I would again, related to that, just remind council and the community, there's a lot of discussion about building more density and building more units can reduce rents. It's true. But we also need to remember that research shows if you build a dense luxury unit in a wealthy neighborhood, it'll reduce rents regionally. But if you build a dense luxury unit in a working class neighborhood, it'll reduce rents regionally, but it'll also skyrocket rents in that specific neighborhood and displace people. So the question of where are we putting density matters tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the real estate tax? All right, going to close the public hearing. No questions, Council? Okay. Next, we have the city manager proposed budget for fiscal year 2020. The first speaker we have is Aaron Winston.
I've already said a lot of my piece. I'm Aaron Winston, city resident. But just echoing some of the things said earlier about commending y'all for the hard work you're doing on this budget. If you had told me we'd have $10 million in this budget a year ago, I would have called you a liar. So thank you very much for the good faith efforts that you're putting in. I'd also just like to draw your attention to a letter that was just recently sent to the council emails. It's from a collection of 8 separate housing advocacy organizations signing on to a letter of intent saying that we are encouraging every potential avenue for raising revenues in ways that don't affect the low-income community and devoting those dollars towards affordability. So if you'll check your emails, you'll find a letter from us there. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Seaman.
She gone.
Carolyn Belt.
Which one was this?
The proposed budget.
Well, the proposed budget, so I'll do it on real estate taxes. Or have we finished with that one?
Yeah, we've already.
It was unclear. She was the first speaker. I was unclear about which one we were on.
But I mean, that's a part of the budget.
I have it on lodging tax too. 'Cause I'll-
Well, no, that's
All right, all right. This is on, I'll do it on real estate then. Well, when you assessed it at $500 million, I thought that was enough, instead of going ahead and adding the tax on. And the thing is this, if you assess it, you can't get real estate relief. You can't get real estate relief if your house is assessed higher than what you're asking for. So this is my problem, and I was thinking, why not give people 65 and older a break on their real estate, and just do it across the board. If you're 65, you get a break. If you're 70, you get a little bit more break. But we need something to help us, because we're stuck in the middle here. We make the house is assessed too much, even though the money is okay. We can't still get relief. So that's my problem.
All right, thank you. Peter?
Good evening, Council. Peter Krebs, city resident. One of my mentors taught me that design equity is often revealed in the small gestures, not the huge ones. She told me that spaces that work well for the elderly, for the young, and the disabled provides access for those who need it the most, but they're also great spaces for everyone. Actually, I could almost make a paper airplane in my speech after that Bennett's Village playground proposal, because they said it super well. The current budget contains some subtle elements that are good and equity focused. For example, it doubles the city's commitment to ADA sidewalks, upgrades, and retrofits, so people can walk, roll, or be pushed through our city streets with dignity. It includes a restroom at Riverview Park. I'm glad that stayed in the budget, because it's mostly going to serve the very young, the old, mothers, and their children. That's great. These are examples of the kind of work that we need to do to make the resources that we have truly available to everyone. I applaud that. The budget does not include any of the large gesture projects that we see sometimes. For example, the new pedestrian bridge at McIntyre Park. I'm actually fine with that. I think you guys are doing it the right way, and you'll see why in a second. The completion of the Jefferson Area Bike Ped Plan, which is just now being approved, is going to bring forward some very exciting opportunities for crossing barriers like highways, the Rivanna River, streams, and even railroad tracks. These are big investments that only government can make. Albemarle County is making an unprecedented $6 million+ investment in bike pedestrian infrastructure. But interestingly, that's dropping in FY21, so they can use the time to find the exact right mix of projects. I think you should do something similar.
Sorry. Thanks.
Although I'd always love to see more funding for Bike Ped in Charlottesville, I think you should think ahead a little bit and set aside now, starting either now or in FY21, when the county is also dropping its Bike Ped money. Make a smart, well-crafted package of investments that will help us become the safe, connected, equitable community that we would like to be. Thank you.
Joan Swanberg. Walt. Heineke.
Just quickly, Walt Heineke, 1521 Amherst Street. Two things about the budget. Three things. Thanks for all the hard work by staff. I really appreciate it, because it shows a lot of thoughtfulness in the budget. One on sort of the negative. What I heard today from some citizens is that we can do better in terms of prioritizing and eliminating waste. And I think some of the past decisions that have been made about consultants and other things are kind of hurting us today because people have lost some confidence in the ability of the city to sort of efficiently look at cost expenditures when it comes to those kinds of things. So I want to sort of reiterate that I think we really should be taking a hard look at the ABRT process. And I'm an evaluator by training, and the only two questions I ask repeatedly for 22 years have been, is this program working well, and should we fund it? And I'm not quite sure the city does that very well. We need to ask more questions about our programs and evaluating our programs. Maybe think about bringing in some help from UVA or something to help with thinking about that. The last thing I wanted to say is just on this issue is, again, big picture, I think next year when the media comes back and they start saying, well, what has Charlottesville done to respond to 2017? I think this budget's going to be a jewel in that crown. And I think it's going to be a way of responding to that question nationally. So I applaud you for this budget and its commitments to affordable housing. I hope, and I have to admit I didn't look closely enough, but I hope there's some money in that budget to support an effective CRB. As it's developed, it's going to be needed to be staffed and funded at a significant level, and I'm not quite sure if that's in the budget, so if it's not, I ask you to take another look at that. Thanks.
Don Gathers.
Good evening again, Council. Don Gathers, city resident. And to echo what the sentiments are of so many that I've heard, kudos to you all for the hard work that you put in, and to you, Mr. Murphy, for the budget that you put together. Thankful that it includes so much towards affordable housing. Am I correct, though, that I saw that in the city schools budget, $6.5 million is earmarked for CIP projects, and $3 million of that is for a study?
Yeah, study and design.
Okay. I think if we would just simply talk with the school board, with the school staff, with the students and the parents, we might be able to save that $3 million and shift it somewhere else, rather than utilizing $3 million of almost half of their CIP for a study. We sometimes study things to death, and I think that money would be best utilized somewhere else. And if we can't put it into the actual school building so that students can study, then let's look at some monies going towards specifically and directly towards public housing, and even beyond that, jobs programs for our low-income residents. Maybe some sort of Go Tech program, since there are so many tech jobs in the area and coming to the area. So that we can prepare people for these jobs when they do come available. And then transportation, so that the residents of low-income and public housing communities can get to those jobs once they're prepared for them. I just think that there's so much more that can be done. I applaud what's being set aside right now, and the $10+ million for affordable housing. But let's not forget the public housing segment as well, and make sure that we take care of all of those affected in those particular communities. And it has just a domino effect. If we want to move them and transition them upwardly, we've got to have jobs available, and that means that they've got to be trained and taught these jobs that are coming in, and then they have to be able to get to these jobs. So unless all of that's already in place, and also let's make sure that we take care of the reentry program, so that our people can again be made viable and useful citizens here once they reenter the communities and the workforce. So I just would really like that we would really hope that we would possibly approach the school system about that $3 million study.
So
Wow. Okay.
The $3 million is a part of the school's now equity plan. They have been presenting this plan for a decade to place the fifth grade classrooms back into the elementary school and move sixth, seventh, and eighth together. So that $3 million is actually part, not just a study, but the design phase to make that happen, to make Walker a centralized preschool.
Okay.
And it's part of the shift they want to make happen, to have less transitions through school that they think would help with some of the equity piece that we are
And I think if we
discussing.
break that out and explain it better, it sounds better than just $3 million earmarked and designated for a study.
We did. We had several meetings. You mean here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
If I may, Mayor Walker, maybe they're actually going to be using that money to produce what they call construction documents, leading to the construction of these new reconfigured schools. It's not a study, it's architectural and engineering documents.
And that's
so,
fine.
and so
I'm
that's
just
maybe
saying
how
how
we
it
need
was
to
presented.
call it out as what it is construction documents that will then give a much more accurate estimate as to what this is going to cost.
Okay.
All right.
Ms. Hill, I'm sorry, do you have?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
You sure? Ed? No. All right. Nancy Carpenter. Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the proposed, city manager's proposed budget? All right, close public hearing on that one. Next, we have the proposed meal tax rate for fiscal year 2020. Mark Cavett, you're up first.
I just think you need to be very, very careful with taxes on meals and lodging. It really does have an effect on people whether they want to go out as much as they may do otherwise. I'll use an example for myself. I can be pretty cheap at times, and I literally have not gone across the street over here to get a muffin because of the fact that I kind of resent the fact that I'm paying 10 cents on a dollar muffin for taxes. And I know sometimes I'm kind of reluctant to go out to a restaurant because I know how much I'm going to pay in taxes when I go out to eat. So do be concerned about that. Thank you.
Walt Heineke. Which muffin is that?
This is what you get when you give a guy 12 minutes in one night. And I'm not even running for anything. So I just want to think a little out of the box here. So like the dude or Jeffrey Lebowski once said, my thinking on this has been all messed up and all wrong. I want to think about this meal. Sorry, it's okay. I'm at that point too, so I get it. I want us to think about reframing the meals tax in a particular way. The way I see the meals tax, I see it as an opportunity to support our post-2017 equity policy here in Charlottesville. I personally actually would be incentivized to eat more in Charlottesville restaurants if I knew that the money that I was spending in those restaurants was going to support affordable housing and the CRB and other equity issues that you guys are all working on. So I would be thinking this is a great opportunity. And I do think if we reframe this in a particular way, that a lot of other people are going to be thinking that this is what they should be doing once they hear that this money is going toward positive outcomes and solving real social problems in this town. I think, in fact, I'll bet you that the number of meals will go up in Charlottesville once the public understands the commitment of this council and this city to social justice. People will want to come from Charlottesville, Albemarle, and other places because they know that small tax is being spent on equity issues. So I predict that will lead to an increase in revenues for restaurants. So I think, from my point of view, when I think about the meals tax, what it looks like to me is an opportunity to engage in socially conscious investing. That's the way I see it. And I think other people are going to see that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Nancy Carpenter.
Again, thank you for letting me address you. I'm just here in support of the meals tax. I was asked today my opinion, and strictly my opinion, how I thought the meals tax might affect a certain cohort that I have experience with. And I said that it's not going to hurt them at all because there are plenty of options for folks to receive meals, and I think like Walt said and Mr. Cavett said, that if we're putting money from the tax into something that has an outcome, a positive outcome, and it is true, Charlottesville is on the cutting edge of what has been going on in the last 2 years in this country and globally, and I think that if we are seen as a leader in addressing our equity issues that have been the result of 150 years of policies that I didn't put in place, but I have benefited from those policies, and I now know how I benefit, and I want to change those policies and make this city a more equitable place for everyone that's here, no matter whether you're been born and raised here and want to raise your family here, if you're a refugee that comes to this country because you see it still for a reason as a shining beacon, or you are someone who comes here because of school and you like the area, but I think the meals tax is a small part to pay when we want to create and have a more just world. We're imagining what that is, and with this equity policy that you all are talking about, perhaps it can start coming to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak about regarding the meal tax increase for fiscal year 2020? All right, I'm going to close that public hearing. Next, we have the proposed lodging tax rate for fiscal year 2020. The first of two readings, we have Carolyn Belt. First up.
Carolyn Belt, and I live on Little High. And I would like to somehow separate the lodging tax from Airbnb and hotels. Hotels are a big corporation, and they have them backing them. We are paying the tax out of what we make, the Airbnb. We are cleaning and changing sheets, not hotel staffs. And I just think it's unfair that the Airbnbs are being taxed just like the hotels, when it's really a family business where you're trying to make a little money to pay your taxes. And I just think it should be somehow separated. That's my opinion.
All right. Walt.
Last one and even shorter. On the lodging tax, here again, it's about the perception of this community. I think people are going to want to come here when they see a lodging tax for social equity purposes. They're going to say, this is where my money's going. And it doesn't really affect our community that much as people coming in. It's people that come to the football games. It's people that come for UVA events. So I say, let's rob Peter to pay Paul. I'd be happy to create a nice little sign that says, my hotel supports equity, and give it to every hotel owner in town that supports this tax increase. So they can hang it in their window, and people can see that they support equity. And maybe it'll increase their lodging rates, and maybe more people want to stay in those hotels over other hotels. And another thing is you've already given them a deal. You let them build all these hotels in this city. You've already done something for them. Let them do something for us, right? So this is where I really think we can start to think about doubling down on increasing funds for the CHAP, for the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund, for any kind of rental tax relief. This is where I think we can start doubling down and start figuring out where we're going to get that income. So again, I know you're all at most of you are at 111, but I would encourage you to think more expansively about where we're going to get the funds for CHAP and the Affordable Housing Fund and the rental tax relief. And I think the lodging taxes makes perfect sense to go there. Thanks.
Thank you. Nancy Carpenter.
Thank you, Nancy Carpenter. I'm here talking in support of the lodging tax. Just today, the Marriott Corporation, which has a number of their hotels in this city, released their 5-year strategy plan. They're planning on building 1,700 hotels, which I'm sure are globally, over the next 5 years, and also give back their shareholders about $11 billion. So I don't think that they're going to squabble too much, or any of these other corporate hotel chains are going to squabble too much about a 2% lodging tax. Because if you're going to come here because you're an alumnus and you want to go to a football game or a basketball game, or you're coming for a film festival or a book festival or a beer festival, you want to go on a beer tour, hop the Crozet winery trolley that they have now and go and do that kind of stuff, I think you're going to come and do it. I don't think $5 or $6 or $7 increase is going to stop you from wanting to come to this city and enjoy some of the cultural activities. Someone mentioned Airbnbs. I'm very conflicted about Airbnbs because I think it takes rental housing out of the market. If you're going to rent out your place, rent it out all the year. So that's a different issue. I don't know if they can be separated out or whether they even should. I'll leave that to the city manager's office and the staff there and you all to kind of hash that out. But thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the lodging tax?
I want to agree with the gentleman behind me who made the comment that if he knew where the tax money was going to, such as to affordable housing, that it would be more acceptable to him. I would also agree with him on that. Also want to say something concerning like B&Bs. There's a lot of taxes money that's being lost through both assessments not being done correctly and B&Bs. I know of B&Bs, people that are collecting the tax money, but it's not being reported to the city. There needs to be a crackdown on the companies that are operating that way, and there needs to be enforcement of the rules and regulations that are already on the books. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to?
Brandon Collins. I live in Charlottesville. Lived here my entire life. You know, I got spurred on by the question of Airbnbs, and it really just occurred to me there is a problem with Airbnb in terms of if we're looking at accessory dwelling units. People who have a basement apartment or have an apartment outside their house. There's been a lot of talk about that being a way to something we can encourage to meet our affordable housing needs. And it's expensive, right, to get somebody to incentivize them to provide that at a lower rent for somebody to live in, and then they have to compete against Airbnb. If you are going to do anything, you should tax them at the same as you would a hotel, right? It's still probably a moneymaker for whoever's doing Airbnb versus what they would make off of affordable housing, but it just seems like, just kind of wanted to point that out. Lastly, just to kind of wrap up, I know this is lodging tax, but you've got various taxes. It seems to me, there's support for raising revenue. The hard part, it seems to me, that y'all are having is which tax and how much. And I really encourage you all to work really hard together to find a solution to fund this stuff. It's vitally important. Again, there are at least 500 people on public housing waiting lists. I think if you combine that with Section 8 waiting lists, you're talking about 1,200 people. We're looking at the city voucher program coming in to try to ease some of that pressure and just not being able to get far enough to ease that kind of pressure. So when you're looking at these taxes, when you're looking at lodging tax, because it's the lodging tax public hearing, please come to some kind of agreement and make it meaningful and make it work out, because we really need this and we know you want to address this and we know you can do it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the lodging tax rate for fiscal year 2020? Okay, going to close public hearing. And just a reminder that we will have a budget meeting tomorrow night at 6 p.m. so you all can come out again and join us.
Mayor Walker, I have just a question for Mr. Murphy.
But are we at City Space? Water Street tomorrow, so 6 p.m. at Water Street.
So, Mr. Murphy, tomorrow night, you're going to be clarifying what the 111 plan provides. And my understanding on Saturday, when we discussed this, that would allow us to more robustly fund the CHAP relief program as well as a rental relief program.
Yes. There are probably more additions that are hoped for from the council than the extra one in real estate accounts for. But as I understand the mission for me and the staff, it is this, that there is a hope that we put $1 million into flexible funding for application in the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund. That we will look at some scenarios where we can add to go further than we have in the manager's budget on CHAP, and I had suggested that we look also at the rental side that we have not previously discussed in the budget. There is, in addition, some discussion. We'll present you with a scenario and a recommendation. I've heard several counselors talk about, if you're going to increase meals and lodging, should we carve out any of that new revenue for those industries for some sort of marketing, advertisement, et cetera. So we'll prompt that question in our analysis. So I think in broad strokes, I think that while there is ballpark less than this, $771,000 being added in potential revenues with the real estate 111 plan, that I've got us at roughly minus $800,000 that the staff is working on tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So after tomorrow's discussion, we'll know if we're going to have another meeting the following week. Is that a fair? Okay.
Sure. And Mr. Blair, if you would just clarify for the counselors, it's my understanding that since the manager's proposed budget had the 1 cent, 1 cent on meals and lodging, that we won't need to re-advertise public hearings, but should they endorse real estate, that's less clear because it's not in the manager's budget, but we did advertise the potential. So do we need to hold another hearing on April 1, or are we okay?
No, you would not need to hold another public hearing on April 1.
Great.
Because you advertised at 97.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to take a break.
Oh, that's good. Actually.
Yeah. 10 minutes.
raise them 10 times 2%. I think everybody here wants to raise. I think I'm losing out. I think people want to. On the left. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
Is this the last thing?
Mr. Murphy, I think you're waiting on. I mean, I'm just saying. Oh, it's powerful.
All right, call this meeting back to order. Next, we have the rezone of 918 Nassau Street, Hogwaller Farm to mixed-use highway quarter. This is the second. Right?
Yeah, yes, Madam Mayor, I think tonight, this would be the second of two readings. And so you can vote on both
And
the
there's a vote.
rezoning as well as the special use permit. You heard this back in January.
Yeah.
The same permit.
Oh, I thought because there was a new proffer, we had to have another first. I guess
Well, we have another public hearing.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Good evening.
Evening, Mayor, City Council. Matt Alfley, City Planner, Neighborhood Development Services. Tonight you have a public hearing for both rezoning and SUP for 918 Nassau Street. You did originally hear this back in February 19th. You had a public hearing. The applicant voluntarily amended their proffer statement, and that's why you're having another public hearing this evening. And that proffer statement was amended to reduce the square footage of commercial down to from 4,000 to 2,000 square feet, to set a cap at 2,000 square feet on churches. And also, the applicant amended the proffer statement to increase the time on the affordable units, the 10% affordable units, to 20. Thank you. I didn't read here. I wanted to say from 12 to 20 years.
Yes.
The applicant also did provide, it wasn't in the material, but I believe you received an email that showed the business plan for the proposed farm portion of it this evening or yesterday from the applicant. Happy to answer any questions, offer any refresher on this application, or you can open it up to a public hearing.
Any clarifying questions, council? No. All right. So I open the public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor Walker, City Council. My name is Justin Shimp. I'm not going to make another presentation tonight. We had a great conversation about this last time. I want to thank you, Mayor Walker, for how you conducted that meeting. It was complicated, and I think all the issues were really fleshed out. So I'll just speak to the items that were changed. I would note first that just maybe not that it matters so much, but as to why I'm doing this, if you're curious, if I haven't expressed that enough, is that, I'm from more of a rural type background and grew up with fresh food and this sort of agricultural farming lifestyle. And I think it was very beneficial. And one of the challenges of being, in an urban place of the city, which has a lot of things to offer, is it doesn't always have these sort of agricultural fresh food opportunities. This is an example out in Nelson. There's a place called Edible Landscaping where I take my kids out and we go and pick fresh fruits and berries during the seasons. And that's something we want to bring into this project too, Food Forest, where that's something that people can tour as part of the farm. So these are things that are important to me. I felt like when I saw this opportunity, I thought it was the right thing to do with this property. The things we changed, we talked about the question was about the period of affordability. So I talked to the bankers and they looked at it and they were content with extending that to from 12 to 20 years in that. We just reduced the commercial square footage 2,000 square feet as we had promised one of the neighbors it would do. And we provided, just as some supplemental information, just a little our sort of business plan we're developing for how this farm works. I think we heard last time some questions about, well, is rezoning the right way to do this? And really, it's the only way to do this. But I would say that in terms of public engagement, that everybody in the neighborhood, so we have made every effort to talk to them, let them know what's going on, and knocked on doors. I think that it's really a much more engaged process than if you sort of engaged in a citywide rezoning of this. Would Nassau Street get a lot of attention and that kind of thing? Maybe not, but we would give a lot of attention. I think you heard last time the folks who live in that immediate neighborhood came out and spoke in favor of this. And we had a number of people, 125 people, sign a petition in support of our application. So it's been complicated. I think it's important to know that in the staff report for the Planning Commission, they identified 14 ways this project that was supportive of the comprehensive plan. And they said that that approval of the project would further the purposes of the zoning ordinance and the general welfare of the entire community. I think that's what we're about to do here with these type of things. And so I think it's, if you look into all the details and all of it's amassed to and all the time we spent to get to here, that's really the critical piece of this. I know it's had some complexity, but I really appreciate all the time that everyone, the staff, everyone has spent looking at this. I hope we have your support. I do have with me tonight Nicole and Hannah and Kelsey, who have been instrumental in moving this along, helping me out with this project, and it's been a great effort, and I hope we have your support, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you. All right.
We're going to hear the public.
So Mark had it.
First, I want to mention, I hope everybody saw the headlines on the news today about the flooding that's taking place currently in Nebraska. We all understand the need for more housing, the need for more affordable housing, but do we want to build in a high-risk area? Why are we putting low-income people in an area such as Nassau? We are all seeing pictures and videos of flooding, house falling off cliffs, mudslides taking place around the country. I'm sure engineers said building these areas would be safe, that they can mitigate through engineering. One of the city planners said to me last year that if a piece of vacant land had not been built on in the city, there is a reason. A major storm will not in all probability happen each year, but even the Army Corps of Engineers said it will happen. When it does, there's an increased risk to the land, property, and lives, especially if the land has been filled in. Filling in a floodplain constricts the flow of water. It makes the water flow elsewhere, in this case probably upstream. It could possibly cause flooding by the newer constructed homes east of Avon Street by Moores Creek and the trailer courts on the west end. This area has experienced flooding in the past. The applicant likes to say that this project is not in a floodplain. It is. Just because you raise the level of the land does not mean it's no longer sitting in the primary floodplain. How can anyone say it's been raised enough when we know there's a history of flooding on Nassau streets and that boats have actually been observed on the streets by people that are still living today and articles that were written up in the Daily Progress? By the way, I was also told that the affordable housing would be on the bottom level. The flooding that took place this past spring in the county was not in a primary floodplain, yet there was flooding. Did you know that we had large engineered hills at Fifth Street Station that slid down the street the other month due to the heavy continuous rain? I hope that you each have visited the site and seen the survey flags, that you read the information that was given to you, in the past and read the Army Corps of Engineers report, please use common sense. FEMA has mitigation guidelines. However, we have seen time after time how these has proven unsafe. FEMA gives you, our elected officials, the final say as to whether this is safe and appropriate for our community. This is a profound responsibility. You cannot engineer Mother Nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Kimber Hockey.
Hi, my name is Kimber Hockey. I live in the Belmont neighborhood. I think first we need to point out that there seems to be a serious and important conflict of interest because Shimp Engineering was involved in redrawing the FEMA maps. That doesn't seem right or appropriate because now he wants to develop those same areas, claiming that they're out of the floodplain. Also, the Planning Commission has rejected this plan. As outlined in various emails, there are ways as well that this project does not fall within the vision and goals of the city. It's not a safe plan. It seems like we're giving up a lot to award the SUP when there are only 3 affordable units being involved. Also, we have sent you pictures of standing water in the area, as well as apparent mold issues on the apartments. If you look behind there, I don't know, the Linden Apartments on the outside. So there's a question of mold issues, and I know that you, Mayor Walker, in your Facebook page event spoke at length about mold issues and the health issues of concern with putting children in places like that, or just people around buildings that have now mold issues. We've also forwarded you a 10-page bibliography with numerous articles that could have been much longer that against or about the dangers of building in floodplains and how we need to move away from that in our modern building systems. I also want to talk about the fact that it's very difficult if you look back up here on routes. Actually it doesn't show it, but when you're at Moose Restaurant, which is near the BP station there, and you're trying to pull out onto Route 20, it's a very dangerous intersection on that sweeping slope down and up. Even as it is now. And it just seems like putting more density there would cause more problems. Also, I just think that if the goal is to provide local food, fresh food options, you see a huge park there. Why not allow people to garden in that park? Why not have community gardens there? Why not plant edible landscaping? The city could plant edible landscaping or fruit trees. Why not talk with the BP station or Moore's Restaurant about providing better food options for residents that are within walking distance? There just seems to be other solutions, and especially promoting more home gardens. So in the end, I think just because this may sound like a cool idea or a good idea, it doesn't make it a sound idea. It runs contrary to our best building practices. Floodplains exist for a reason. We should respect that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Good evening, Mayor Walker, members of the City Council. My name is David Katz. I live in the Belmont area. My first question would be, why is there no testimony from the environmental staff or other city experts here tonight to address the issues that have been raised by the applicant? Number 2, how does building in or adjacent to a floodplain provide for the welfare of the community? 3, the city has appointed a planning commission consisting of knowledgeable citizens, including development experts, to provide to the City Council advice on development matters. I think you should have an excellent reason to overrule their decision on this issue, and they voted 3-2 against the project. And lastly, again, I'll state that the FEMA maps were redrawn by the applicant, which I believe is a potential conflict of interest. I think they should have been done by an independent third party. An example of a company self-regulating is the tragedy that occurred in Ethiopia due to Boeing's self-certifying the 737 MAX aircraft as safe to fly. Should we allow construction on this site when the floodplain maps were redrawn by the developer of the project? This is your legacy. This is part of your legacy as the City Council in the year 2019. I urge you to think seriously about the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? All right, going to close the public hearing. Any questions or comments, council?
I do have a question, Mayor Walker, for Mr. Blair. And it is the idea of having an independent third party drawing up the FEMA maps. Is that something that is just an oversight in our laws, or is it a good practice?
Well, far be it from me to critique good or bad of the federal government, but I think it is fair to say that the applicant, this is a process that FEMA does provide to landowners, not just this applicant, but other applicants who do want to ask for an amendment to their to the floodplain map. And that process, again, is available to any landowner with land in the map, and ultimately the regulators do have to look at the application and approve it. So there is a level of oversight that goes with it. It's not just Mr. Shemp submitted a revised map and that was it. They don't review it. There are obviously regulators that review it. Now, I can't obviously comment on.
But does that review happen at the point in time when there is a site plan submitted? Like a more formal?
Well, I think it's an independent process.
So, on the flood map issue, so I was hired to redraw the flood map. I should say redraw. I should say submit a study to FEMA so they could redraw the flood map for the Woollen Mills project in Albemarle County. I discovered this property as part of that, realizing that it was very low risk, basically. Look at the technical information. That's how I found it. So the process is a landowner thinks the FEMA map is wrong. They hire an engineer to go and look at this. You submit data. It actually, in this particular case, both City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County signed off on the study. Timmons Group did a peer review of it, and it went to FEMA, whose consultant Dewberry ultimately reviewed it and blessed, and actually they redo the maps. So basically, we provide technical information, surveys, updated information at the behest of the owner, and then they do what it's a pretty standard formula. They do what they will with it. So that's the process. And that's how I discovered the property. And just clear, the reason there hasn't been comments about from like the city engineer and stuff on this is they've already approved it. The construction of this area has been approved already. So as we went through this, that's why you don't see the comments, because the FEMA's already issued the permit and the city engineers issued the fill permit. And in fact, you'll notice under that same permit, the housing is being built down at the other end of Nassau Street, the Habitat lots and the Land Trust lot. So it is a very detailed process. That was probably a 2-year process to amend that flood map. So it goes through lots of scrutiny, lots of review. But the reason it hasn't come up is it was blessed. The decision for you is not if I'm going to build there, but is what's the zoning going to allow there. And
I just want to remind everyone, anyone can build on these lots. It's not that we can put any moratorium on building on these lots.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
One quick question. On the other end, because something you just said was really interesting. On the other end, you said building has already begun?
So
Which is, and I'm sorry, is that also in the floodplain, as people have been describing?
It is, and it'll be elevated out of the floodplain basically through another FEMA process.
And that's essentially what you're doing?
The same thing, yes, that's right.
Okay.
Any other question?
If my colleagues don't have any other questions, I have a question, another one. In the event that, well, not saying this is going to happen or will happen, in the event that this doesn't pass, what would happen to the site?
I hope it doesn't come to that, but if it were, I mean, somebody would probably, I don't know that I would build it because I don't like the plan that you're left with, but you can build a duplex in the back of the lot and park 3 or 4 cars in the front of it. There's a sewer easement in the middle of it that dictates you kind of build in the back. So you could build basically a 2 or 3 story duplex back off the street. That would be allowed without coming back to this process. It's not. I don't know that I would build it, but I would probably sell the land to somebody else who would.
And that's maybe what they would do, maybe not. And I asked that question as I was having a discussion with some of the good folks in the back just now, and we were discussing what happens, because everyone may not be in agreement with this project, but what happens if this project doesn't go through? Will we get more affordable housing? The answer is maybe, but probably not. There's so many other unknown variables because of the construction of the land. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
Can somebody remind me what the planning commission decision was based on?
They did. So the Planning Commission, their action was voting against both the rezoning and the special use permit, and it was 3-2 to recommend denial.
And how much different is it now from what they considered?
The proffers have been amended, so Planning Commission did not see the proffers with the extended time on the affordable units or the reduction in square footage for commercial uses. Other than that, the plan is very much the same as what they made a recommendation on.
And just in fairness, to remind council, I believe we had written documentation from Commissioner Alejandro, who just stated that some of his frustration when he was voting was how late in the game some information was presented that evening, and that influenced the way that he voted. So I know that came up the last time we talked about this, but I just wanted to make sure we all remembered that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Any other questions?
So we are.
So
We're
we're going
voting
to
on
close
this
the public
tonight?
hearing.
Oh, we're still plugged.
Yeah.
We're going to get into our discussion.
And then,
Okay.
because I hadn't done that, so I'm just doing that. Any further discussion among council?
So is this the time when we have to make a motion?
Right, a motion for rezoning and a separate action on the special use permit.
One precedes the other.
Do we do that? Yeah, how do we do this? Because they're linked.
The rezoning came before the special.
I think the rezoning would be the first.
So if you deny the rezoning, makes no sense to do the SEP.
Correct.
Is there a motion?
I move to deny the requested rezoning as recommended by the Planning Commission.
I'll second it.
All right. Any further discussion?
So, yes, I ask myself, is it good practice? And same concerns as before. The workarounds to our existing zoning don't add up to be, in my view, a good, healthy vision for the city. The short-circuiting of the process, in my view, is a breach of trust with the surrounding community, much as it was for the residents of Booker Street, and I made that point earlier. It doesn't conform with the 2013 land use map. It doesn't conform with the comprehensive plan goals. for land use, housing, and transportation. Unlike River Road, which was the applicant came before us earlier this year, the 2001 comp plan didn't name Nassau Street as one of the 11 critical areas to be redeveloped. It wasn't part of the 2013 comp plan's small area planning area. So there's no legacy of it being a place for major redevelopment. So does it meet our needs? We're talking a lot about whether or not you can build on this floodplain or not, and FEMA has evidently approved this permit, but in my mind, it's still a problem because we are still in a floodplain, and this building is centered on an asphalt parking lot that is bigger in area than the footprint of the buildings themselves. And that will degrade, in my view, the waterways. The rationale for the zoning change is also problematic for me. Thank you for bringing some evidence that this farm has a nonprofit organization to it. I appreciate that. It's still not clear to me that the land is been thoroughly tested and in shape for urban farming. You showed us logos of all the different food networks, but I didn't see letters of endorsement. But most importantly, this doesn't relate to the purpose of the proposed zoning designation. That's a fundamental issue. Zoning is an ordinance, it's a law. So when you change the law, you really do need to follow proper procedures. And it can't be mysterious, obscure, and it can't look like we're kind of undermining the public trust. So the Highway Commercial District calls for intense commercial development with very limited residential use. It's intended for where the most intense commercial development in the city occurs. But in this case, it's being inverted. The designation itself is being used to promote residential use, higher residential use. You've just reduced the amount of commercial use that is part and parcel of this designation. And so the mixed-use corridor zoning is supposed to facilitate transit also along significant access routes, but there's not even a bus route down Nassau Street. So it's a convoluted, multi-tiered way to get a kind of a zoning that you want that is contrary to anything in our comp plan and the vision statement of the community. And so I also think that the building type you've introduced, in my view, it still looks like a lower cost kind of suburban motel form. It doesn't have any of the character of the building types in that area. So yes, we get 3 or 4 affordable housing units, but I can't lower my own professional standards because of affordable housing. It's supposed to be excellent standards, in my view. And so that's why I can't support this. It doesn't follow our comp plan. It doesn't follow our standards of review. It's not in keeping with the physical character of the community itself, and I'm pretty sure that's why the Planning Commission didn't adopt it.
Any other comments?
No, I mean, I certainly share many of the concerns raised by Councilor Galvin. I know that one of the things we gave feedback on last time was understanding what is really the vision for this business side of this, and I still have concerns that I really don't see that there's a partner for this urban farming vision, and I think it's a pretty unique thing that's trying to be done, and I wanted to get behind it. I just don't see that it has the support it needs to be sustainable. But beyond that, I really just have seen this as such a multi-step way just to get to this outcome, and for many of the reasons that she already stated, I just always struggled, because as someone, you want to think that when people are living in their neighborhood, they can expect that certain things are going to change within like an SUP's scope. But here we have a rezoning for something that's a highway corridor, which to me, I think that of all the highway corridors, that's the one that I find to be the least, that should be considered a highway corridor in itself. And then now we're moving it multiple blocks away, and we're truly in the deep residential portion of this, and we're doing that, and then we're just, then again, not even delivering on what that zoning is. We're then converting it back into residential and, high-density residential at that. And I can see that there certainly is other parts of that neighborhood that have a higher density. I just think that the way that this is presented and the small compact nature and just the intensity of that just gives me great pause considering what was intended to and what's reflected in our comprehensive plan. And so I echo a lot of the concerns raised by Councilor Galvin.
So, it's our turn. So I think I'm more inclined to, I want to hear this discussion. I'm not coming in with a extremely strong point of view, but I am, after the refinements and even after this discussion, I'm still where I was the last time, which is I'm interested in innovation. And I think that it's a pretty creative use of a part of the city that's not going to be used in a very creative way and likely. And I do think that as the city moves in all these different directions that we hear a lot of concern about, that having this kind of funkier, use in this particular area could be really healthy in sort of the bigger ecosystem of the city. And with all of the risks that are being highlighted, and there are lots, aesthetic, I tend to think that if you're a developer vested in the ownership of the property, that you have a deep disinterest in building in a floodplain in a way that would actually hazard your investment. I mean, that's probably the most, and I found the analogy to Boeing strained, although very vivid. But, I'm inclined to put the benefit of the doubt on, as long as it has met, and I think the Planning Commission had a difficult vote, and it was a divided vote, because it's a complicated project, and it's a risk, it's taking a lot of, it's a very inventive, creative project that's taking risks and is coloring outside the lines in some ways. But I think looking at the overall picture and how it would fit into the city, I think that it could be healthy enough and different enough and creative enough in the overall landscape of the city that I find the pros outweigh the cons. And so I see the benefits. But it's a challenging, you've made it challenging because it's a very unusual, quirky, complicated project, but I would be inclined to vote for it.
So,
and the affordable housing piece, I would say, tilts it even more so, given how complicated the pros and cons are for me.
Mayor Walker, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
So for me, I thought I agree with Councilor Signer. It's very complicated because, to me, I thought it was an innovative project, and Ms. Galvin is one whom I often look to, specifically regards to land use situations, and I think she lays out a very compelling argument. Listening to some of the residents back there, I thought they also made very compelling arguments. However, here's where it's, and it looks as if this may not have the vote, so I just want to say my piece. Here's where I think, even if this doesn't pass, we still are going to have to look at different models in the future. Like, we say that we want different forms of affordable housing. Affordable housing is important to us. We only have 10.5 square miles. People have to be rather innovative or try to be as creative as possible when it comes to building. So I think Ms. Galvin's point, I hear you wholeheartedly when you say it looks like it may have went around a wide variety of different ways to get what the developer wanted in terms of zoning or getting where he needed to. But I mean, our process is flawed, I think, in the eyes of many. It takes a whole lot that people have to go through just to reach certain points. And I wonder what message do we send to future developers, because again, we don't have a lot of space We don't have a lot of room. So when people do come with innovative projects that may have, or excuse me, that will have an affordable housing component to it, and this it's just different. The farm piece, the business piece. What message are we sending? But the members of the community in the back said something to me that really stuck as well. And they just have real concerns about the floodplain. It's late. Thank you. Floodplain. I'm sorry. That can't be ignored. And I think also there are concerns about the neighborhood right now. It can't be ignored. So, well, I'm just saying like how the neighborhood goes, rather. I just think that also can't be ignored.
What was that? Okay.
Never mind. Go ahead. That's it.
Okay. No, I think just, yeah. Just our
Can't have a
discussion
response
time.
at all.
So I talked to, I think 3 neighbors in the past week or so who were concerned about the way the rainwater would be directed from the property. They said they discussed that with you all in a public meeting. There was one, and I know it's a private property, but there's someone currently on the property who would be displaced as a result of the development, which I know if you build 2 duplexes, that person could be displaced also. I like what has been presented. I would have liked it earlier for the farm, and the potential uses there, and the extending the affordability period. That was a plus. I'm sort of with Mike on the FEMA floodplain, and if you are going to build something that you're not selling, I probably would feel the same if you were selling it, about the fact that you may not care long-term what happens to individuals on it, but that because it's going to be an investment, that you may have a different viewpoint there. So I'm still probably inclined to follow the Planning Commission recommendation here, but I mean, I have thought about this probably longer than I've thought about most, all but one other development that's been put before me. The neighbors that I talked to, who were the actual neighbors, did think that it could work. And they were just concerned about the potential water damage to their property, because they already think that the city, needs to be doing something different with the water runoff in that area. So it was a combination of city and, and the potential with this development. And I guess my question, if you could answer, in the plan, there's no concern from city staff about the engineering aspects in terms of the water and where it's being diverted to?
So city staff has looked at it in the course of a rezoning and an SUP. They have not done a full site plan review. If it were to get approved and get an SUP, their next step would be to submit a site plan, which would have to follow all the regulations, standard engineering practices, stormwater. There have been, that's been one of the talks that staff had as part of the SUP. There has been kind of talking about how you would view this development. So typically we would review a development for stormwater in the city. And a developer would have kind of several options. They can either do their stormwater detention on site, or they can buy credits off site. This property is a little bit different as far as it straddles both the city and the county. And staff has been very concerned about treating as a whole common plan of development. So you just wouldn't have the city looking at the city side and the county looking at the county side. And so trying to work on the mechanism, whether that's DEQ doing the review or the city and county going into an agreement to do the review for the whole site. But it would be different than what you typically see because it is cross-jurisdictional.
So in that case, so if we approve this change to mixed-use highway corridor and then we don't agree, once the site plan has been submitted, there's no undoing?
Well, if you were to approve the rezoning and not the SUP component, all you'd be doing is changing the zoning to highway. The SUP has a condition recommended by staff that the property is viewed as a common plan of development and not just on one side. So if that was passed, that would go along with this, with the plan in front of you. So if the applicant's plan didn't go forward and the SUP expired, you would be going back to the rezoning. It'd be highway, and then another plan could come forward from a different applicant in the future.
That could use the mixed-use highway corridor.
Correct. And that's that kind of the weird.
Well, I did want to add, though, that you're right, it would still have the same zoning if you approve the rezoning, but the proffers also become part of the rezoning. So those same proffers would still apply. Let's say 918 Nassau Street, scrap this plan, but you would approve the rezoning. They still would be limited to the proffers that are there, including the 2,000 square foot limitations on commercial uses.
Thanks for pointing that out. I just got ahead of myself on that. Yeah, the proffers would stay. I was jumping way ahead just because the one weird thing about our highway corridor is there's the affordable unit count in the proffers, but that is conditional on someone would have to get an SUP for density. Right. It's a weird zoning that there's actually no density in this. The only way to get density is through the SUP.
Okay. All right, thank you.
If I could, there is one other small twist based on your questioning. In the SUP, condition number 10 goes through the stormwater management process. And at the very end of that, it says, the landowner shall not utilize nutrient credits or other off-site conditions to meet water quality requirements unless the proposal is approved by both the city and county if it's locally administered or by the state. So there is that aspect of the city, or if the city and county administer this site jointly, both the city and county have to agree that they're allowed to have off-site nutrient credits rather than putting the ponds and measures in place on site.
Okay.
So this is not, so the stormwater management is not on site?
Well, based on SUP condition 10, if you approve the SUP, there, as Matt explained, there are different options that all owners have through the stormwater management process. But this particular condition is saying that, rather than them just, for lack of a better term, by right going to an off-site nutrient credit, that it would have to be approved by either the city and county or the state, depending on who's administering the stormwater.
Oh, so it's not automatically on site?
Right, it's not automatic.
Okay.
Is that?
Yes, that's correct. what staff wanted and worked with the legal department is they just wanted to make sure that the best stormwater practices were being followed. And because it is a little more complicated being across jurisdictions, they didn't want to just say it's going to be one or the other. They wanted it to be collaborative. You come up with the best solution. That could, and where this kind of came from is, and not saying this would happen, but if you were going to do on-site water treatment for the whole site, but you needed to put your BMP on the county side, that still needed to count toward the city side. And so that's where this kind of came from.
So why wasn't there, so I'm just asking a question. So the planning commission didn't put its typical conditions on this because they didn't approve it?
Correct. When this went to planning commission, staff had some looser recommendations. And one of the things that came out of planning commission is planning commission asked legal to look at the conditions and provide more detail. And so this condition came out of that.
Well, because I remember again on the River Road project, which also had problems with stormwater management, it was adjacent to the Rivanna, that the planning commission insisted that there would be on-site stormwater management best practices.
Correct.
But that condition has not been placed on this one, and I'm wondering why.
That condition was in place because planning commission didn't put any conditions on it.
They rejected it.
They rejected it, but they asked that city council look at staff's conditions. But one of this condition, when staff had prepared it, was not this in-depth. It was a looser condition that legal wanted to look closer at. So planning commission directed legal to look at these, I believe it was the last 3 conditions, to provide more information.
So just to my colleagues, in my view, this is actually a much more sensitive site than River Road, and it does not have the on-site best practices for stormwater management. That's what I'm hearing.
No, it could.
It could, but it's not mandatory.
But they can't just buy off-site credits without approval from the 2 jurisdictions or the state. So it left that flexibility in case, and I'm not an engineer so I can't get into it, if buying credits turns out to be the best thing to do, that needed to be in there so the applicant could do it so their hands weren't tied.
The best thing to do for who?
For the stormwater plan.
Okay, so it's based on the engineering of the plan.
Correct, yes.
All right. All right.
Can I ask one question last item? Just to answer a question you had directly.
No, it's, yeah. Okay. Huh?
Was he asked a question?
That's fine.
Thank you. But you asked the question, if this is approved, what happens, if we don't sort of agree on stormwater? The answer doesn't get built. So if I don't comply with all of the city standards for the stormwater drainage, I won't get actual site plan approval. And so I think the question that the neighbors have brought up is there is some failed drainage across the front of the property, and probably some old drainage across my property contributes to that. I have to fix that as a portion of our plan. So there would be improvements there. The nutrient credit thing is worded such that basically the only way I could buy that would be if both the city and the county agreed there was no better alternative. So both those departments would look at the engineering plans and they would push for the on-site treatment. Only if there was no way to do on-site would I be allowed to purchase off-site. I don't think that's going to be the case. We'll do something on-site in this case.
Okay. Are there any other? No? All right. So ready to vote?
So the motion is to deny.
All right. All right. So the motion to deny carries 3 to 2.
No, it didn't.
No, it failed.
So now somebody's got to,
Oh, no. Okay.
Did you vote for the wrong thing?
I definitely did. I'm sorry. Let's wait.
what do we do?
So, well, I think in this instance, as the mayor, if you could just say, how about considering this, if Ms. Galvin could remake her motion
And then we revote, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathy.
Second.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Is there?
Because I went and knocked on the doors of every single house around that neighborhood twice. And we held a community meeting solely for those community members. And they cannot be here tonight because they have jobs and children to take care of. And I told them, don't make the effort to come. But they do support the project. And so twice, more than twice, it has been mentioned that the immediate neighborhood will be surprised or that this is not in their interests. And that's just plainly not true. I've talked to them individually. The individuals in this neighborhood are in support of the project and they don't have a voice here. And there's a reason for that, and that's a problem with our process. And I think it's an important thing to bring up. And the reason why the highway zoning is in place is because there's no other zoning to put a greenhouse. And so that's a process problem, not with the application. And so I think that's an important point as well. So I just wanted to make sure that I state that because these processes come up with other applications as well, and voices are not heard, and there's a reason for that. And Matt can attest, I'm at 80% of those comp plan meetings, and we all know who's in those rooms. So I think it's an important point to make.
I would say that was one point in my statement that I forgot to mention, which I was struck in the last time by the strength of the immediate neighbors. And there was that, I was struck by that, and I just forgot to make that point with the other ones that I mentioned, is that the immediate neighbors did seem very favorable, and there were a couple who came up and spoke very eloquently about how they thought this would, do wonders for their immediate neighborhood.
Yeah, well, I guess I could make the motion again. We could have more discussion if we want.
I think it's,
But, okay.
it's ready to be made again.
All right, so I want to make sure I do this, say this right. So I move that we deny the requested rezoning as recommended by the Planning Commission.
And I seconded it. And I'm seconding it.
And I won't belabor this, but I'll just say process matters. Our ordinance is a law. We know that we need to change our ordinances to be in keeping with our comp plan, but we are not there yet. This is an incredibly convoluted way to get to something that increases residential density in an area that is highly sensitive from an environmental standpoint. And so I think it is really important that we pay attention to our processes, and we don't use our discretionary review just cavalierly and think that this is innovative. We need zoning to do that for us in keeping with our vision of the community.
So you don't think with updated zoning?
Oh, we absolutely will.
That this would fit?
I don't think it would. Because personally, but with that right now, at least we're investing in getting new comp plan update with a comprehensive affordable housing strategy, and we're going to be getting new zoning to be aligned finally with our vision. It hasn't happened since 2003. And I've just seen this a lot, where we go through and create exceptions to the rule over and over and over again because the zoning isn't workable. But in this case, this is so far removed from the zoning that it's being zoned to, and it's not, there's a reason why it hasn't been heavily developed on that side of the street. It's because that is in a floodplain area.
So as long as we're having more debate.
Well, it's with the motion opened
Sure.
up again.
So I guess my response to those things would be that, so I'm closing in on been on council West for 3.5 years now. So we've been having the same conversation about overhauling the zoning code for 3.5 years. And I guess the thing is that it just, if that is what so much action is backstop behind, the pace is so glacial. I mean, we moved West Main Street forward, which is unrelated, but it is related in some ways, 3 years ago. Nothing's happened. I mean, a lot has happened, but we haven't broken ground yet. For change to happen in the city of 10 square miles, it just will be very glacial if we have to wait behind this comprehensive overhaul of the zoning code, which we've been talking about for years. So and coupled with that, when the arguments against something do become very strained, which I feel like some of these arguments are quite strained, and that's why they have to be brought together all on top of one another to make the case as overwhelming as it can be, then it feels to me like that you can vote for the innovation and for the pros outweighing the cons. Anyway, that's how I still see it.
Anyone else? All right.
Okay, so.
Right. So.
I didn't say vote yet. Okay. All right, vote. All right. And so do we need to?
No, you wouldn't need to vote on the SUP at this point.
All right, and sorry about the first vote.
Good words.
Yeah.
Just died. 2 years. Just working on this for 2 years.
So we just have other business, which
We
was
have your
the
consent agenda
consent
item.
agenda item.
Madam Mayor, members of council, I've corresponded with the jail superintendent this evening. This is a administrator that they work with to recapture the federal funds. This has been in effect longer than the superintendent or the budget person have been there. They've corresponded with us tonight. I can only imagine that it is because the process of recapturing the money from the feds is so onerous that it has this admin fee. It has been the same for as long as these folks have been there. I don't know why it's never been questioned by a council in the past, but they did not have any new layer of information about the how and why. I've asked them, when was it chosen, and was it chosen competitively, and other questions, but they don't have any additional information. So we can decide to put it through tonight, or I can ask them to investigate if there's any alternative for the administration of the funds, keeping in mind that I think what we're talking about is, what, $14,000 in all, and probably $3,000 to the administrator.
$1,099.
Yeah, so that was one of my questions. The other question was, does this, receiving this funding, trigger mandatory ICE notifications? And
No. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mayor.
So that was the second part of the question, because when I looked at BJA, it said that it administers the State Alien Assistance Program in conjunction with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Department of Homeland Security. SCAP provides federal payments to states and localities that incur correction officers' salary costs for incarcerating undocumented criminal aliens with at least one felony or 2 misdemeanor convictions for violation of state or local law, for incarceration for more than 4 consecutive days. And so then it just looked from, their website that there is a collaborative effort, and so I just wanted to know like what that looked like overall, especially with the conversations that we've been having about ICE notification.
Yeah, yes, ma'am, I understand that, and I would say that Dr. Bellamy can certainly chime in, but as jail board members for the city, it's my understanding that the notification that happens to ICE and any law enforcement agency happens at the point of intake, and that it is required by law, and that the crux of what we've been debating as a jail board is, should a secondary notification, which is elective, happen prior to the discharge to let ICE know when that release date is going to happen. So currently we're waiting on a determination from the governor's office about whether he is going to veto a bill where actually the General Assembly said jails ought to have to notify ICE at the point of release, unfortunately.
Presented by Robert Tracy, by the way.
Yes, so it did come out of the local Commonwealth Attorney in Albemarle County. So it did get voted through. We're expecting to hear in the next week. Is that correct, Dr. Bellamy? They have to go through the vetoes by the end of next week, right? Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I do have another point of business, Mayor Walker.
We took a vote on this.
Yeah, we
Oh, we have to vote on this. Oh, that's right, sorry.
All right. So, is there a motion?
Right.
Yeah.
We need a motion
So move.
to approve the
Appropriation to the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program grant for the 2017 reimbursement.
Second.
Please vote. Carries 5-0.
So, yeah, the motion from her.
Sorry.
All right.
She stole my motion.
Yes, Mayor Walker, back in the end of February, the chair of the Housing Advisory Committee, Phil Duranzio, sent us a request to modify the originating resolution for the Housing Advisory Committee, and that change was to include, to add the Charlottesville Works Initiative to the Housing Advisory Committee, effective immediately as a Category 2 member, as described in the February 21, 2012 Council Resolution. And I realized that we are going to have a more thorough review of the terms and the membership structure of HAC and perhaps other advisory groups, but it does seem to be that there is a real immediate need to have Charlottesville Works Initiative part of this team right at this point in time. And so I understand with Councilor Hill that she's also in agreement with at least discussing this at a future council meeting for this one amendment to the resolution, knowing that there will be a further, more in-depth discussion later.
I was in favor of having the discussion at the same time, so that's still where I am.
I just don't know that we're in a position to have a fully robust discussion. It's going to take some work, I think, to do. And the concern is when we did discuss this and we decided to use the at-large position for another community member, which I really believe was the right decision. I gathered from council that there was a recognition that maintaining that representation from someone from the Charlottesville Works Initiative was important, especially where we are with the housing strategy and the work being done by members of the HAC towards that end. And so my fear is I don't want this to inhibit us from having the really robust discussion we need to have by trying to move us along, but I think that the longer that we don't have this one change in place, that it can be a struggle for where the group is right now and the work that's being done by that membership. So as I've said in other emails, I certainly support and agree to this robust discussion. I just don't know that's something we're going to be able to have in the next month, if I'm being honest about our capacity.
Mr. Murphy, how soon do you think we could get this on the agenda?
To consider the item in
Just the one
isolation?
change. Yeah, in isolation.
I mean, if that's the will of council, it'll go on next time.
'Cause at the time, Mr. Blair had even offered that, it was more about when we first decided it, even before going into it, that we could have had a resolution ready to go the night that we made the decision on that, but we just wanted to be able to give the public a chance to just have it in front of them, and so we didn't
Yes.
jump that. And so my intention was for us to try to get it to this tonight, and so that we could vote on it, but we just didn't get to that point. Mr. Blair?
Correct. If there are two council members, per your rules of procedure, that would like something placed on the agenda, you can request that it be placed on the agenda.
I would second placing it on the agenda. I understand that from them that this is of some urgency.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Wait, we have to ask if the public wants to talk.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Again.
Hi, sorry. Clearly I need rest. So we open up the last community matters. Is there anyone who would like to speak?
Michael Payne, city resident. I'll be very brief, but I think the conversation on Nassau Street highlights again how zoning reform needs to be a priority on par with anything else we're doing on affordable housing. Outcomes like this and applicants being forced to go through a process like this is really going to set us back on affordable housing.
Is there anyone else? Thank you. Meeting adjourned.